Hey guys, welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. Today we are making a super popular British treat, scones. Now, if you've had a scone in the US or elsewhere, it's very likely that you haven't actually had a traditional British scone. So scones in the UK don't look like American scones. American scones tend to be triangular and British scones are circular. They look more like an American biscuit, but they don't necessarily taste or have the same texture as an American biscuit. And they're served with jam and clotted cream, which I'll talk about after we make the scones. But first we are going to go through all of the ingredients and materials you'll need, and I'm also going to show you step by step how to make them. So I'm going to go ahead and get you guys set up for a view where you can see what I'm doing with my hands and with my scones, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I've got you all set up so you can see what I'm doing. Here I am, and that way you can actually follow along. Now, let's talk about what you're going to need. So you're going to need a large mixing bowl, a mixing spoon, teaspoon measurement, some sort of liquid measuring cup, and a baking tray to bake them on. You're also going to need a pastry cutter that's round, or cheat, I just use a cup. And let's talk about ingredients. So, self-rising flour. If you can't find self-rising flour, there's a link below on how to make your own. Sugar, baking powder, an egg, some butter softened at room temperature, and some milk. It can be whole or 2% or what they would call semi-skimmed here. Now I'm going to talk about the ingredients in the metric system because that is what we use in the UK, but I will also put the basically American conversions down in the description below. So if you are making them in your US kitchen, go ahead and check that out for the conversions. Okay, I am going to use this little gadget, the kitchen measuring scale, to start measuring out some of my ingredients. What we're gonna do first is we're going to put the flour, sugar, and baking powder all together in a bowl. So I'll just stick my bowl on top of here and turn it on. Now we are going to want 225 grams of flour, we're going to want 25 grams of sugar, and we're going to add our baking powder, which is going to be 1 teaspoon. So I will take my teaspoon, level that off, and go ahead and put that in there. Now I'll just go ahead and give it a brief mix around. There we go. Now what I want to do is I want to put my butter into this mixture, and it should be softened at room temperature. I'm going to add 50 grams, and I'm going to make sure that I chop it up a little before I put it in. Now for the fun part, I am going to use my hands in this bowl to basically pinch the butter and the flour together. So it's going to eventually resemble some kind of like breadcrumbs, and it is a messy process, but just keep working it into the dough. Okay, that's all rubbed or pinched in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my liquid measuring cup, and I want to first crack my egg directly into the cup. Then I want to add milk until it gets to the 150 milliliter mark. And I'm just going to stir that together. Okay, now add the milk mixture to your flour mixture. You might not want to add it all, so just add a little bit, mix together. And we're going to end up with a sticky dough, but not so sticky that we can't cut it out. Okay, now I think this is going to work for us. So again, it's sticky, but I can still pick it up and maneuver it. Now we're going to clear off a workspace, move your stuff to the side, and you want to lightly flour your workspace. Spread that around. And we're going to turn the dough out onto the workspace. Now, some recipes say to roll. I usually end up just pressing it down because it's quite difficult to roll. I'm going to go ahead and press it down with my hands. I like to do mine about a 1/2 inch thick. So we're not going as thin as like a cookie dough. We still want it to be pretty thick. And I'm just gonna turn it over. And do that. Okay, so now we are going to take our pastry cutter or the top of a glass, and I'm just going to cut out circles. Just like that. Now, I'm going to cut my circles and then I will put them on the baking tray and talk about the baking process. If you end up with a situation like this, just mesh it all together and re-press it out. Okay, now I'm going to get my baking tray and place the cut out scones on it a couple inches apart. They will spread a little bit. So let's do 6 on this tray. Just like that. Now, the oven is going to be 200 degrees Celsius. Again, if you are doing this in Fahrenheit, conversion below. Now, all we need to do before we put them in the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes is I'm going to just, with my fingers or a paper towel, add a little bit of this milk and egg mixture to the top. There we go. Put these in the oven for 10 to 12 minutes and I will show you what they look like when they're done. Now I'm going to show you how to actually assemble your scone. So I said before there's a difference between cream tea and afternoon tea and just scones. So having a scone is having a scone with clotted cream and jam. If you are having tea, which I can get, so I've got my tea in my Girl Gone London mug with scones, clotted cream, and jam. That is called a cream tea. So if you go to a hotel or a cafe and they're serving cream tea, you should basically expect tea plus scones and the clotted cream and jam. If you're going for afternoon tea, that is what is going to include your little finger sandwiches, other cakes and sweet items, as well as your scones. So a lot of people get confused between a cream tea and an afternoon tea, and there you have it. Afternoon tea has sandwiches and other treats. Cream tea is just the scones and tea. Okay, so I'm going to cut my scone in half. And now I have my 2 halves. If you want to do the Cornish way, you are going to first add the jam and then add the clotted cream on top. If you want a Devonshire style scone, that is going to be my preferred way, which is the cream on the bottom and the jam on the top. Now, I also promised I'd talk about clotted cream. So clotted cream, which looks like this, is traditionally found in the UK. You can also find it in Australia and other places, but in the US in particular, not at all common. If you want to make your own, you can, and we'll have the recipe for that down below. So it's not a lot of work, but it is a lot of time. You can also usually find it at places like Whole Foods or World Market or things like that. You can also buy it on Amazon, but the very specific cream that is used with a scone is called clotted cream. If you don't have clotted cream, you can use like heavy cream and whip it up. You can put butter on a scone. It's not traditional for a cream tea, but again, if you're trying to find things to have with your scone and you don't have clotted cream, you can use another type of cream. But luckily I live in the UK, so I've got some clotted cream. So if we're doing, like I said, the Cornish way, I've got my scone, and I'm going to take some of this jam, make a mess, and I'm just going to put a giant thing of jam all over this scone, like so. And then I'm going to take my clotted cream and slather that around on top. So that is, let's see if we can get this to focus. So that is a Cornish style scone with clotted cream and jam. Now, if you're doing it the Devonshire scone way, I'm going to take my scone and I'm going to take my cream on the bottom, just like that. And then I'm going to take my jam and go ahead and put that on top. It's personal preference. There is a huge debate that will constantly rage in the UK over which way is correct, but there are two ways that are traditionally approved to do it. So that brings us to the end of our scone making tutorial. So get your scone, get your tea, and enjoy. If you have any questions, leave them down below. Again, the recipes, links to buy certain things, and also the conversions for the Americans watching are all below. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.